That day changed my life forever. I was 14 years old when I woke up and saw my mother crying with him in the living room. The man who never wanted me was now begging for help. Good morning, my dear viewers. This is Edith Wilson, 68 years young, sharing a story I've carried for more than 5 decades. I'm speaking to you from my porch in Millfield, Ohio, where the sweet tea is always ready and memories never leave me, even when I wish some of them would. Before I begin this difficult story, I wanted to share something with you all. The team at Amidst is doing a $500 giveaway, and entering is so simple. Just subscribe to our channel, hit that like button, it costs nothing, and tell me something about yourself in the comments, your favorite color, favorite food, what you love doing, or even which state you're watching from. This helps this old lady continue sharing her stories, and hopefully gives strength to those going through similar experiences. I grew up without a father. Not the kind where you say, I grew up without a father, but still saw him occasionally. No. I grew up barely knowing what he looked like. Mom kept an old yellowed photograph where he leaned against an old Chevy, cigarette in his mouth, looking sideways at the camera as if he didn't want to be there. That's your father, Edith, she'd say when I insisted on asking. We lived in a simple house in the east side of town, a place where everyone knew each other. My mother, Margaret, worked as a seamstress, doing all sorts of jobs, from hemming pants to wedding dresses when orders came in. Money was tight, but we never lacked food on the table or love in that house. Mom was one of those strong women America's full of, raising a daughter alone, working from sunrise to sunset, and still finding energy to tell me bedtime stories. Your father left before he even knew you, honey, she explained when I turned 7 and my questions became more persistent. He loved his bottle more than responsibility. When he found out I was pregnant, he disappeared for a week. When he came back, it was just to grab his few clothes and say he wasn't born to be anybody's father. I grew up hearing stories like that, pieces of a puzzle that never formed a complete picture. Jack, that was his name, was a handsome man who charmed women with smooth talk, but had the devil's whiskey as his best friend. He was quick to anger, worked little, lived from odd job to odd job, and left a trail of broken hearts wherever he went. At least that's what my Aunt Judy said when Mom wasn't around. Your mother deserved better, Edith. But sometimes our hearts choose wrong. At school, birthday parties, any place where families gathered, I felt that hole. Other children had fathers who lifted them onto their shoulders, who taught them to ride bikes, who scolded them when needed. I had only silence where there should have been a deep voice, only emptiness where there should have been strong arms. Not that Mom didn't try. She did the work of 10 people. But there are things you miss even without ever having had them. Life followed its normal course in our little house. I went to school, helped Mom with sewing when I could, played with the neighborhood kids. My father's absence was like a ghost we learned to live with. Always there, but we pretended not to see it. Until everything changed that morning. It was a Sunday in March. I remember it like yesterday. The smell of fresh coffee coming up the stairs had woken me. Mom usually made cornbread on Sundays, so I got up excited, thinking about breakfast. That's when I heard the crying. I tiptoed down the stairs, my heart pounding. Mom wasn't one to cry. She was the kind of woman who saved her tears for when she was alone in her room, where nobody could see. Hearing those sobs in the living room scared me more than anything. And there he was. A thin man, already graying hair despite not looking that old, unshaven, with dark circles that seemed painted on his yellowish face. He wore a worn-out shirt that had seen better days and faded jeans that seemed too big for his body. He sat on our couch, head down, while Mom cried standing, one hand covering her face. "Who are you, sir?" I asked from the staircase, making them both look at me at the same time. It was Mom who spoke, wiping her tears with her robe sleeve. "Edith, this is Jack, your father." Those words fell like a stone in my stomach. My father, that worn-out man, smelling of cigarettes and whiskey strong enough to sense from across the room, was the man from the yellowed photo? Was he the one who had left, even before seeing me born? "Is this Edith?" he asked in a hoarse voice, looking at me like he was seeing a ghost. How she's grown, how I've grown. As if he had ever seen me small. As if he had any right to comment on my growth that he hadn't witnessed for a single day. "What's he doing here?" I asked Mom, completely ignoring the man who was now struggling to stand up. Edith, don't talk like that, Mom answered, always concerned with manners, even in a situation like that. Your father came. He needs help. That's when I noticed how torn Mom seemed. There was anger in her eyes, but also pity. And maybe, deep down, a tiny bit of that love she once felt for this man. She was always like that. Too soft-hearted for her own good. Jack took 2 steps toward me, limping slightly. Only then did I notice his sickly appearance. It wasn't just a hangover or a bad night's sleep. I'm sick, daughter, he said. And that word, daughter, sounded so wrong coming from his mouth that I almost laughed. I've got nowhere to stay, no money for medicine. I came to ask your mother for help, just until I get a little better. And why should we help you? I asked, coming down the rest of the stairs, courage growing inside me. You remembered you had a daughter now, after 14 years? Edith, Mom scolded me, but you could see that deep down she was wondering the same thing. I deserve that, he answered, surprising us both. I deserve your anger, your contempt. I was an absent father, a husband who wasn't worth anything. But I'm paying for it now. The drinking destroyed my liver. Doctors say I don't have much time if I don't take proper care. I have nowhere to go. He spoke looking at the floor, as if he didn't even deserve to look us in the eyes. And maybe he didn't, but there was something in his voice, a weariness, a defeat, that made even my rebellious teenage heart soften a little. Mom asked me to go up to my room while they talked. I went reluctantly, but obeyed. Through the door crack, I tried to hear what they were saying, but could only catch pieces of the conversation. Last chance, Margaret. Things aren't that simple. She has the right to know her father, even if I won't let you hurt her again. I stayed in my room for hours, stomach growling with hunger, but without the courage to go down. When Mom finally knocked on my door, it was almost lunchtime. Edith, we need to talk, she said, sitting on the edge of my bed. She seemed to have aged 10 years that morning. Your father is going to stay with us for a while. What? I exclaimed, jumping out of bed. After everything he did? After abandoning you while pregnant? After never even wanting to meet me? Honey, I know it's hard to understand. She held my hands, her eyes still red from crying so much. But he's really sick. The doctor gave him 6 months to live if he doesn't get proper treatment. He has nobody, Edith. And that's our fault? I asked, pulling my hands away. He chose to have nobody when he chose the bottle instead of family. I know, Mom sighed deeply. But he's still your father, Edith. And despite everything, I once loved this man very much. I can't turn my back now, knowing he might die alone on some street corner. At that moment, I hated my mother's soft heart. I hated her ability to forgive what I thought was unforgivable. But I also admired, deep down, that strength she had to do what she thought was right, even when it was difficult. He'll stay in the back room, she continued. He'll need help with his medicine, with the special diet. I know it's not fair to ask this, but I need you to try, honey. Try to give your father a chance. I didn't answer. The lump in my throat was too big to let any words through. I just nodded, agreeing without really agreeing. And that's how Jack Wilson, the father I never knew, entered our lives after 14 years of absence. He came like someone asking for forgiveness, like someone who doesn't deserve a second chance but begs for one anyway. He came sick, defeated, a shadow of the handsome man in the yellowed photograph. That day, while Mom was fixing up the back room and preparing a special lunch that wouldn't be hard on his liver, I sat on the stairs, watching that stranger who was my father. He noticed my gaze and attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. One day you'll understand, Edith, he said softly. One day you'll understand how a man can make so many mistakes that there's no coming back. I didn't answer. I just kept watching, recording every detail of that face that should have been familiar but was completely strange to me, not knowing that this was just the beginning of a nightmare that would change our lives forever. Oh, my dear viewers who are watching this far, life sometimes prepares such surprises for us. And how wrong I was to think that the worst had already passed, that growing up without a father had been the hardest part of my story. Little did I know that the true ordeal was just beginning when that man crossed our door. The first weeks with Jack in the house were strange, to say the least. It was like having a ghost living in the back room, a ghost who coughed hard in the middle of the night, who took colorful pills at mealtimes, who looked at me with those sunken eyes as if wanting to say something but never finding the right words. Mom bent over backwards with care. She made special low-fat, low-salt foods, herb teas she learned from a neighbor who knew about these things. Washed his clothes with a care that gave me a twinge of jealousy. All for that man who had never done anything for us except leave. At first, I tried to keep my distance. I left early for school, came back, and went straight to my room, only came down for dinner when forced. But gradually, curiosity overcame anger. After all, how many questions had I stored up all those years? How many times had I imagined what it would be like to have a conversation with my father? One afternoon, while Mom had gone to deliver a sewing order, I found myself sitting on the back doorstep, watching Jack taking weak sunshine in the small yard. "Why did you never come back before?" I asked, the question escaping before I could hold it back. He turned his head slowly, as if the movement hurt. "Shame, maybe," he answered after a long silence. "Or cowardice. Probably both." It wasn't the answer I expected. I thought he would make up some excuse, say he tried to come back but couldn't, that he thought about me every day. But no, he admitted he was a coward, that he was too weak to face what he had done. "The drinking didn't help," he continued, looking at the sky. "Each year that passed made it harder to come back. How do you explain to a child that her father preferred the bottle to her? How do you look in the eyes of the woman you abandoned while pregnant? So I drank more to forget, and the more I drank, the more impossible it became to return. At that moment, I felt neither pity nor forgiveness. But for the first time, I saw my father as a human being, broken, flawed, but human. He was no longer the monster of my childish imaginings, nor the hero I secretly hoped he might be. He was just a man who had made terrible choices and was now paying for them. The days went by, and Jack seemed to improve a bit with Mom's care. The yellow color diminished. He gained a few pounds. He could already walk around the yard without getting out of breath. He started helping with small things around the house, changed a burned-out light bulb, fixed the kitchen cabinet hinge, things like that. Small gestures that made Mom smile in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. It was about a month after his arrival that I noticed the first strange things. One night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps. They weren't Mom's footsteps, which always moved lightly through the house. They were heavy, dragging footsteps. I peeked through the door crack and saw Jack walking through the living room, mumbling things I couldn't understand. He went from one side to the other, stopped, stared at nothing, kept walking, as if he was looking for something or running from someone only he could see. In the morning, when I mentioned it to Mom, she said he had insomnia because of the medicine, that it was normal. But her eyes didn't meet mine when she said this. Then came the laughter. Laughter for no reason, that started out of nowhere and ended just as abruptly as they had begun. Sometimes in the middle of a meal, sometimes while watching television. Guffaws that didn't match anything that was happening, that made Mom give those nervous smiles and quickly change the subject. "It's just happiness about getting better," she would say when I asked. "Your father always had this kind of different sense of humor." But it wasn't humor. I knew it wasn't. There was something wrong, something that went beyond liver disease, beyond alcohol withdrawal. Something in his eyes when the laughter ended, an emptiness, a confusion, as if he himself didn't know why he had laughed. The beer incident happened on a Sunday, about 2 months after his arrival. The three of us were in the living room watching a Sunday night program on TV. A rare thing. I usually avoided being in the same room as Jack for too long. But that day, at Mom's insistence, I agreed to watch 60 Minutes with them. That's when the neighbor, Mr. Thompson, showed up with a 6-pack of beers to watch the game, not knowing about Jack's condition. Mom tried to politely refuse, but Jack insisted that the neighbor stay, that it wasn't a problem, that he was already strong enough to resist temptation. The atmosphere became tense immediately. Mom cast worried glances at Jack, who pretended to be super interested in the game, while Mr. Thompson, oblivious to the situation, opened one can after another. "You sure you don't want one, buddy?" Mr. Thompson insisted, holding out a cold beer toward Jack. "One won't hurt anybody." I saw my father's look change at that moment. Eyes fixed on the can, throat moving up and down as he swallowed hard, hand trembling slightly at his side. It was like watching a man drowning, fighting to keep his head above water. "No, thank you," he answered hoarsely. "I really can't, Mr." Thompson shrugged and continued drinking, commenting on the game increasingly loudly as the empty cans accumulated. At some point, he made a sudden gesture while complaining about the referee, and the beer in his hand spilled on our living room rug. That beige rug Mom had bought with such sacrifice, payment by payment. "Oops, sorry," laughed Mr. Thompson, already half drunk. "Margaret can take care of that later." It was as if a switch had been flipped. Jack jumped up, face red, eyes bulging, pointing his finger at the neighbor. "Respect other people's homes, you disgusting drunk!" he shouted, his voice unrecognizable with so much rage. "Who do you think you are, coming here, drinking in my house, and then staining my wife's rug?" Mr. Thompson, startled by the disproportionate reaction, raised his hands in a peace gesture. "Easy, buddy. It was an accident. I'll pay for the rug cleaning. No need for all this stress." But Jack wasn't listening anymore. He was somewhere else, consumed by a fury that seemed to have been stored for years. He lunged at the neighbor, tripping over his own foot, and would have fallen if Mom hadn't stepped in front. "Jack, for God's sake, it was an accident," she pleaded, her hands on his chest, trying to push him back to the couch. That's when he did something that changed everything between us. He pushed Mom aside forcefully, making her hit against the bookshelf and knock down the few knickknacks we had. And when I tried to run to help my mother, he turned to me with his arm raised. The slap hit my face with such force that I saw stars for a second. I fell sitting down, more from shock than pain, hand on my hot face, unable to believe what had just happened. The room fell into absolute silence. Mr. Thompson, wide-eyed, muttered something about settling this another day and hurried out, leaving the door open behind him. Mom was paralyzed by the bookshelf, hand over her mouth, eyes full of tears. And Jack was looking at his own hand as if it had acted on its own. "Edith," he mumbled, taking a step in my direction. "I didn't mean to. I don't know what." "Stay away from me," I screamed, dragging myself backward until I hit the wall. "Don't touch me." His face contorted in an expression that mixed shame, regret, and something else. Something that only later I would understand was the beginning of the madness that was consuming him. "I'm sorry," he repeated, now with tears streaming down his wrinkled face. "I'm sorry, daughter. I don't know what came over me. It was the beer, the smell of it. It messed with my head." Mom finally came out of her trance and ran to hug me. I felt her trembling as she helped me up, as she gently passed her hand over my red face. "Never again," she said with a voice I had never heard before, firm, cold, definitive. "Never again will you lay a finger on my daughter, Jack, or I swear to God I'll call the police, sick or not." That night, I locked my bedroom door and cried myself to sleep, not from the pain of the slap, although my face still stung. I cried for the lost hope. For a few weeks I had allowed a small seed of hope to grow inside me. The hope that maybe, just maybe, we could be a normal family, that Jack's remorse was genuine, that he really wanted to fix the damage he had done in our lives. That slap didn't just hurt my face. It hurt that fragile hope, crushed it completely. In the days that followed, Jack went back to isolating himself in the back room. He hardly appeared for meals, and when he did, he barely spoke, barely looked at us. Mom continued to care for him, bringing food, medicine, clean clothes. But something had changed. Her look was different, more cautious, more distant, as if she had finally woken up from a dream and seen reality as it was. But this wasn't the end of the nightmare. In fact, it was just the beginning. The nights became the worst time. His footsteps through the house became more frequent, more erratic. Sometimes I would wake up to the sound of things being dragged in the living room, or to his voice arguing. With no one, he talked to himself for hours, alternating between conspiratorial whispers and angry shouts. One night, I heard him in the kitchen. He was making so much noise I thought he was breaking everything. When Mom got up to see what it was, I followed her from a distance, terrified of what we would find. Jack was sitting on the kitchen floor, surrounded by pots and utensils he had taken from the cabinets. He was organizing everything in perfect rows, mumbling something about, "They won't find me here," and "I need to protect you two." Mom managed to convince him to go back to bed, speaking softly, calmly, as if dealing with a frightened child. But when we returned to the hallway, I saw the terror in her eyes. She no longer recognized this man either. He was no longer the Jack who had abandoned us years ago, nor the sick and remorseful Jack who had returned asking for help. It was something different, something broken beyond repair. The next day, while Jack was sleeping, he now spent most of the day sleeping and the whole night awake. Mom called me for a serious conversation. "Edith, your father isn't well," she said, rubbing her hands together, a nervous gesture she'd had for as long as I can remember. "It's not just his liver. Something's wrong with his head." "I think we should send him away, Mom," I answered, the mark of the slap already gone from my face, but still very much alive in my memory. "He's becoming dangerous." Mom shook her head, sighing deeply. "I can't do that, honey. He has nowhere to go. No one. And in this state, he wouldn't last a week on the street. And us? How long will we last with him here?" I asked, my voice harder than I intended. Her gaze met mine, and I saw the conflict tearing her apart inside. The love she once felt for this man, the instinct to care for someone clearly sick, the maternal responsibility to protect me above all else. "I'll take him to the doctor tomorrow," she finally decided. "This behavior isn't normal. Maybe they need to adjust his medication. Maybe he needs another kind of help." I agreed, relieved that she was finally admitting we needed outside help, that we couldn't handle this alone. But tomorrow brought things much worse than any doctor's visit could solve, things that would change the course of our lives forever, that would mark me in ways no 14-year-old girl should be marked. That night, my loves who are listening to me, that night of May 17th, 1971, was when our little private hell turned into an endless nightmare. It was when I discovered that there are real monsters in this world, and that sometimes they have the same blood that runs in our veins. I was awakened in the middle of the night by a sound I will never forget as long as I live. It wasn't a common scream, the kind you hear in an argument or when someone gets scared. It was a primitive, desperate sound, the kind of scream that comes out when a person is beyond fear, beyond despair. It was my mother's voice. The clock on the nightstand showed 2:37 in the morning. I sat up in bed with a jolt, my heart beating so hard it seemed to want to come out through my mouth. After the scream came a dull thud, as if something heavy had fallen to the floor. Then, silence. A silence worse than any scream. I was paralyzed for a few seconds, those moments when the body still can't obey the brain. The rational part of me said to stay quiet, lock the door, hide. But the other part, the one that knew my mother was downstairs and needed help, made me get up and walk toward the door. I opened it slowly, trying not to make noise. The hallway was dark, just a sliver of light coming from the living room downstairs. I went down the stairs step by step, each step harder than the previous one, as if my body knew that what I was going to find would change my life forever. What I saw when I reached the last step was etched in my mind like a terrible photograph that never fades, never becomes less vivid with the passing years. Mom was lying on the living room floor, her body strange, in a position no person would choose to be in. A dark pool was spreading under her head, her always so neat hair now soaked in a red that looked black in the dim light. And her eyes, oh my God, her eyes open looking at nothing, not blinking, lifeless. Standing next to her, holding a broken and bloody lamp, was Jack, my father. His pajama shirt stained with the same dark red that was spreading on the floor, his eyes wide like those of a cornered animal, his breathing as heavy as someone who just made a great effort. "Dad?" The word escaped as a whisper, my voice so weak it didn't even seem like mine. He turned his head in my direction in a sudden movement, as if only now realizing I was there. For a moment, I saw no recognition in those bloodshot eyes. It was as if he was looking through me at something or someone only he could see. "She wouldn't listen to me," he said, his voice thick, slurred. Only then did I realize he had been drinking. The smell of whiskey was strong even at that distance. I told her they were coming after us, that we needed to run away, but she wouldn't listen to me. I took a step back, the understanding of what was happening hitting me like a punch to the stomach. Mom was dead. My father had killed her, and now it was just the two of us in the house. Him completely out of his mind, still holding the murder weapon. You killed Mom, I said, the tears finally coming, blurring my vision. No! He shouted, dropping the lamp which fell with a dull thud on the stained carpet. I didn't kill anyone. It was an accident. She fell, hit her head. I just wanted her to listen to me. He took a step in my direction, hands outstretched as if he wanted to reach me. Instinctively, I backed away more, climbing one step of the stairs. Something in my movement seemed to awaken something in him. His look changed, focused on me for real for the first time. You're going to tell them, aren't you? He asked, his voice suddenly lower, more controlled, more frightening. You'll say I killed her. They'll lock me up again. Again? The word escaped before I could think. A strange smile formed on his face, a smile that didn't match at all the macabre scene around us. Your mother never told you? I spent 3 years in prison before I met her. Bar fight, stabbed a guy who didn't pay a debt. He laughed, a horrible sound at that moment. Margaret was the only one who didn't know about my past, or pretended not to know. Foolish woman, always believing the best in people. Each of his words was like a knife twisting in the open wound that was my heart at that moment. How could he talk like that about the woman he had just killed? About the woman who took him in even after everything he had done? I'm not going to let you ruin everything now, he continued, now walking decisively in my direction. I'm not going back to jail, not after everything I've been through. I turned and ran up the stairs, terror giving me a strength I didn't know I had. I heard his heavy footsteps behind me, climbing the steps 2 by 2 despite his age and illness. I entered my room and tried to close the door, but he was already there, pushing with his shoulder, too strong for me. Stop, Dad. Please, I screamed, knowing it was useless, that there were no neighbors close enough to hear, that we were alone in this nightmare. He managed to push the door hard enough to make me fall backwards, hitting against the bed. He entered the room and closed the door behind him, turning the key in the lock. The sound of the metal turning sounded like a final sentence. I didn't want things to be this way, he said, standing over me, blocking any escape route. I really wanted to be a father to you, Edith. I wanted to fix things, but now it's too late. What happened next is something I try every day of my life to forget, but I can't. The memory is there, always fresh, always painful, like a wound that never completely heals. He threw himself on me with all his weight, immobilizing me against the bed. The smell of sweat, whiskey, and my mother's blood suffocated me. I tried to fight, scratch, bite, but he was much stronger, even while sick. With one hand he held my wrists above my head. With the other, he began to tear my nightgown. If you stay quiet, it'll hurt less, he mumbled against my neck, his voice so different from that of the man who asked my mother for help months ago. Always wanted to know if you were like her. The horror of those words gave me one last impulse of resistance. I managed to free one hand and hit my nails against his face, scratching deep enough to feel the skin tear under my fingers. He roared in pain and slapped me with such force that I saw stars, then another, and another, until my body went limp, with no strength to fight. The taste of blood in my mouth mixed with the tears that wouldn't stop falling. What followed was the worst nightmare a 14-year-old girl could live through. The rough hands traveling over my body, the searing pain, the disgusting whispers in my ear, his weight crushing me against the mattress where I had slept safely so many nights. I don't know how long it lasted. It could have been minutes or hours. Time loses meaning when you're in hell. At some point, my mind simply shut down, like a defense mechanism. It was as if I were floating above the scene, observing from afar what was happening to that girl on the bed, unable to help, unable to stop it. When it finally ended, he collapsed beside me, panting, now too drunk to stay conscious. In minutes, he was snoring loudly, a heavy arm still thrown over me like a chain. I lay still, motionless, for how long I cannot say. My entire body ached inside and out. I felt something warm and sticky between my legs, but couldn't look, didn't want to confirm what I already knew. Silent tears streamed down my face, but I made no sound, afraid of waking him, afraid it would all start again. When I was sure he was in deep sleep, I dragged myself out of bed, each movement an agony. I grabbed the first clothes I found, an old dress that was thrown over the chair, and dressed with difficulty, my hands trembling so much I could barely button it. My mind was strangely calm now, functioning with a clarity that didn't match the chaos around me. I knew I needed to get out of there. I knew that if he woke up, he would probably kill me like he had done with Mom. I was the only witness to what he had done. And now, I was one more crime on his conscience, if he still had one. My bedroom window overlooked the porch roof. It wasn't such a big fall, but still scary for a girl who had never done anything like it. I opened the window carefully so as not to make noise, the cold night breeze hitting my face, giving a false sense of cleanliness after everything that had happened. I looked one last time at the man who was my father, now snoring on my bed, unconscious of the evil he had done, of the life he had destroyed. First my mother's, then mine. I felt a hatred I had never experienced before, a hatred so great that for a second I thought about taking the scissors on my desk and ending him right there while he slept. But I couldn't. I wasn't a murderer. I wouldn't be like him. Carefully, I went through the window and sat on the porch roof, feeling the rough shingles under my bruised legs. The sky was beginning to lighten slightly. It must have been around 5 in the morning. Soon the day would dawn, as if nothing had happened, as if the world hadn't just collapsed for a 14-year-old girl in Millfield, Ohio. I dragged myself to the edge of the roof and looked down. The fall was bigger than it seemed from inside the room. Down below was a flower bed with the flowers Mom took such care of. Daisies, pansies, those simple flowers she loved. For a moment, the image of her watering those plants hit me with such force that I almost lost my balance. I would never see my mother again. Never feel her embrace again. The lavender scent she always had. The sound of her laughter in the rare times she allowed herself to relax. I took a deep breath, swallowing the sob that threatened to escape. I couldn't make noise now. I needed to be strong, for myself and for my mother's memory. Carefully, I turned face down and began to hang from the edge of the roof, my feet looking for support on the porch column. The pain in my body protested with every movement, but adrenaline and fear gave me strength to continue. My feet finally found the wooden column, and I began to descend, hugging it as if it were a ship's mast in the midst of a storm. When I was almost reaching the ground, my arms weakened and I fell on my back in the flower bed. The impact was cushioned by the soft soil, but still painful enough to leave me breathless for a few seconds. I lay there, among Mom's flowers, looking at the sky that was getting lighter and lighter. Part of me just wanted to stay there, let the hours pass, let life end with the night. What was the point of continuing after everything that had happened? But another part, stronger, more determined, the part that my mother had created with so much love and sacrifice, pushed me to get up, to survive, to seek justice for what that monster had done. With effort, I stood up. I looked one last time at the house that had been my home throughout my life, the house where so many happy memories had been created, the house that now held my mother's body and the monster who killed her. Then I started walking, or rather, dragging myself toward the street. I didn't have a clear plan. I just knew I needed to find help. I needed to find someone who would believe me, who could stop Jack before he escaped, before he hurt anyone else. I remembered Officer Richards, who lived a few blocks down from us. He wasn't exactly a neighbor, but Mom always spoke well of him, said he was an honest man, upright, one of the few police officers you could trust. He had helped when Mrs. Bailey, our elderly neighbor, had her house broken into last year. With this destination in mind, I began to walk as fast as my injured body would allow. The streets were deserted at that hour. Millfield was still asleep, oblivious to the tragedy that had happened in the seamstress Margaret's house. Each step was an agony, each breath an effort, but I kept walking, driven by desperation, by fear, by the need to make someone believe in the nightmare I had lived through. When I finally reached Officer Richards Street, the sun had completely risen. The first people were beginning to leave for work, looking curiously and fearfully at that injured girl, with the torn and stained dress, staggering down the sidewalk as if she were drunk. His house was easy to recognize, the only one on the street with an American flag hoisted in the small front garden. I dragged myself to the gate and rang the doorbell, my strength almost at an end, the world beginning to spin around me. The door opened and I saw a tall man with close-cropped gray hair, wearing a white t-shirt and pajama pants. He looked at me confused for a second, then his eyes widened in recognition and horror. "My God, girl, what happened to you?" I opened my mouth to answer, to tell everything, to beg for help, but no sound came out. Instead, the world darkened around me, and I felt my body fall, as if all the strings holding me up had been cut at once. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was strong arms holding me before I hit the ground, and a deep voice shouting for someone to call an ambulance. Then, only darkness. A merciful darkness that for a few hours freed me from the memories of that night that had destroyed my childhood, my innocence, my entire life. Oh, my dear viewers who are listening to me, how difficult it is to relive these memories even after so many years. Sometimes I wonder if I should bury them once and for all. Let the past remain in the past. But something inside me says that telling this story is important. Not just for me as a way to exorcise these demons, but also for those who are listening, so they know it's possible to survive even the worst of nightmares. That it's possible to rebuild life, even when it seems like there's nothing left to rebuild. And that's what I had to do after that terrible night in May 1971. Rebuild from scratch, brick by brick, a life that seemed irreparably destroyed. I woke up in a hospital room, the smell of disinfectant invading my nostrils, the constant beep of a machine beside the bed marking the seconds, reminding me that, despite everything, I was still alive. I tried to move and a sharp pain shot through my entire body, bringing back all the memories that for a brief moment of unconsciousness I had managed to forget. A nurse entered the room as soon as she noticed I was awake. She had a kind face, the kind that seems made to comfort people in difficult times. She adjusted the IV in my arm, checked my vital signs, and told me in a soft voice that the doctor would see me soon. I noticed she avoided looking directly into my eyes, as if afraid of what she might find there. The doctor, an elderly gentleman with white hair and deep circles under his eyes, examined my injuries with a gentleness that made me cry silently. He explained that I had several contusions, a sprained wrist, some cuts that needed stitches. He talked about other things too, things a 14-year-old girl shouldn't have to hear, about examinations, evidence, procedures. He used technical words that I didn't fully understand, but whose terrible meaning I grasped anyway. When he finished the examination, he said there were some people who needed to talk to me. I saw the fear in his eyes as he said this, as if he feared that conversation would break me completely. Officer Richards came in accompanied by a woman who introduced herself as a social worker. They sat in the chairs beside my bed, their faces serious, prepared for the worst, which was appropriate, because the worst was exactly what I had to tell. With a trembling voice at first, then firmer as the words found their way, I told everything. About my father's return months ago, the strange behaviors, the slap, the nights of insomnia. And then about that early morning, my mother's scream, the dull thud, the blood on the living room floor, her eyes open to nothing. I told about his drunken confession, about how I tried to escape, about what happened in my room. Throughout the account, Officer Richards took notes in a small notebook, his face increasingly grim. The social worker held my hand, squeezing it gently at times when my voice failed, when tears made it impossible to continue. When I finished, a heavy silence fell over the room, broken only by the insistent beep of the machine, that sound that seemed increasingly like an accusation. You are alive, while my mother was no longer. We've already sent a patrol car to your house, Officer Richards finally said, closing the notebook. We'll find your father, Edith. He'll pay for what he did. But something in his tone told me there was more. Something he didn't want to tell me. Something that would make this nightmare even worse, if that was possible. What is it? I asked, recognizing the hesitation in his look. There's something you're not telling me. The officer exchanged a quick glance with the social worker, who nodded slightly, as if giving permission to continue. When the patrol car arrived at your house, your father was already gone, he finally said, choosing his words carefully. They found your mother, exactly as you described. We're looking for Jack now. We have men on the roads, at the bus stations, everywhere he might try to flee. The idea that he had escaped, that he was somewhere out there while I was stuck in that hospital, filled me with a terror that no words can describe. What if he came after me? What if he tried to finish what he started? "He won't find you," said the social worker, as if reading my thoughts. "You're safe here. There's a police officer at your door, and it will stay that way until we catch your father." I nodded, trying to believe those words, trying to find comfort where it seemed impossible. In the days that followed, I stayed in the hospital, recovering physically while my mind tried to process everything that had happened. I received a visit from my Aunt Susan, my mother's sister, who lived in Columbus about an hour away. She cried, hugging me for hours, murmuring words of comfort that couldn't penetrate the wall of pain I had built around myself. It was she who organized my mother's funeral, sparing me that final blow. I couldn't go. I was still in the hospital, still considered too fragile, both physically and emotionally. Sometimes I wonder if that was a blessing or a curse. Not having been able to say goodbye to my mother left a void that was never really filled. A week later, when the bandages had already been removed and the stitches were beginning to heal, I received the news. Jack was still on the run. The police had followed several leads. Several witnesses thought they had seen someone matching his description, but nothing concrete. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. "I'll take you to my house," said Aunt Susan, sitting on the edge of my hospital bed. "I've already talked to the doctors, the social worker, the sheriff. You're going to live with me in Columbus now. It's better that way, away from here, away from the memories." I didn't answer. What could I say? I no longer had a home to return to. I couldn't imagine entering that living room and seeing the place where my mother had died. I couldn't climb those stairs and enter the room where... No. I couldn't even complete the thought. "When?" was all I asked. "Tomorrow, if you feel well enough," she answered, fixing a strand of my hair behind my ear, a gesture so similar to what Mom used to do that I felt the tears return. "I fixed up a room just for you at my house. It's not much, but it will be a new beginning." I nodded, grateful for her kindness, for the chance to escape from that town that now held only nightmares for me. When I left the hospital the next day, a patrol car was waiting for us. It wasn't just a courtesy, it was protection. Even with Jack missing for a week, nobody wanted to take any chances. He could be anywhere, waiting for an opportunity. The trip to Columbus was long and silent. Aunt Susan tried to make conversation a few times, talking about the city, about how I would like the new school, about the cousins who barely knew me but were eager to receive me. I responded with monosyllables, unable to match that effort, still too trapped in the memories of that night. When we arrived at her house, a simple but cozy building in the suburb of the city, I was greeted by Uncle Robert, Aunt Susan's husband, a quiet man but with a gentle look, and by my cousins Michael and David, a few years older than me. They all treated me with a care that bordered on reverence, as if I were made of glass and could break at any more abrupt touch. And maybe that was indeed how I felt. Fragile, broken, patched up hastily, but with cracks that no care could completely repair. The first weeks at Aunt Susan's house were a blur of nightmares, appointments with psychologists, formal statements to the police who were still looking for Jack. I barely left the room, barely ate, barely spoke. The weight of the loss, of the trauma, of the violence suffered was like a giant stone on my chest, making it difficult even to breathe. It was on one of those sleepless nights, about a month after arriving in Columbus, that I heard a conversation I shouldn't have heard. Aunt Susan and Uncle Robert were talking in the kitchen, their voices low but audible in the silence of the early morning. "They called from Millfield today," Uncle Robert was saying. "Seems like Jack was seen again around there." My blood froze. He had returned? He was in my town, maybe in my house. My God, will we never be free of this nightmare? Aunt Susan's voice trembled. What does he want? Why doesn't he just run away for good? Who knows what goes on in the mind of a monster like that? Uncle Robert answered bitterly. Maybe he's looking for the girl. Maybe he wants to finish what he started. Don't say such a thing even as a joke, exclaimed Aunt Susan. I've already warned the police here. They'll keep an eye out, do extra patrols in the neighborhood. And Robert, please, you and the boys, don't leave Edith alone, not for a minute. I went back to bed with my heart racing, the fear that had begun to diminish returning full force. He was looking for me. It wasn't over. It would never be over as long as he was out there, free. That night, I made a decision. I couldn't continue living like this, in fear, hidden, making my aunt and uncle and cousins live in a constant state of alert. It wasn't fair to them. It wasn't fair to me. I needed to find a way to end this once and for all. In the days that followed, I began to pay more attention to conversations, to local news, to any information about Jack. I discovered he had been seen several times in Millfield, always near our old house, always at night. The police set up stakeouts, but he seemed to have a sixth sense, disappearing before they could catch him. Then, one Sunday while setting the table for lunch, I heard something on the radio that Uncle Robert was listening to on the porch. A reporter was talking about the preparations for the 4th of July celebration in Millfield, mentioning that, despite the recent events that had shocked the town, the tradition would be maintained. The central square would be decorated. There would be live music, food stalls, games for the children. It was as if a light bulb went on in my head. That was it, the 4th of July celebration, the only event of the year when the entire town gathered in the square. If Jack was in Millfield, if he was obsessed with the house, with what he had left behind, he would certainly be around during the celebration. Perhaps it was the chance for the police to finally catch him. But for that, they would need to know exactly where to look. They would need bait. The plan began to form in my mind. Terrible, risky, but possible. I would return to Millfield for the 4th of July celebration. I would let myself be seen, let the news spread. Jack would certainly hear, and if he was really looking for me, he would come after me. The police would be prepared, waiting. It would be a trap. Of course, I could never convince Aunt Susan and Uncle Robert to let me return to Millfield, much less to be used as bait. I would have to do this alone, without them knowing. In the 2 weeks that followed, I planned every detail with a care I didn't know I was capable of. I gathered what little money I had saved, some coins that Aunt Susan gave me from time to time, a $5 bill that Uncle Robert gave me on my birthday. It wasn't much, but it would be enough for the bus ticket. I discovered the schedules of the buses that went to Millfield, memorized the route. I wrote a letter to Officer Richards, explaining my plan, asking him to organize an operation to capture Jack during the celebration. I wasn't sure if the letter would arrive in time, or if he would take seriously the plan of a 14-year-old girl, but it was the best I could do. The celebration would be on Saturday, July 4th. On Friday night, after everyone had gone to sleep, I packed a small backpack with a change of clothes and the money I had gathered. I put the letter to Officer Richards inside an envelope I had gotten at school, with the address of the Millfield police station. I left a note for Aunt Susan on my bed, explaining that I needed to go back, that I needed to close that chapter, that I would be fine, and would return soon. The plan was to leave in the early morning, catch the first bus to Millfield at 5 a.m. I had studied the house, knew which floorboards creaked, which window could be opened without making noise. I knew Uncle Robert was a heavy sleeper after the night shift at the factory, and that Aunt Susan took a sleeping pill that left her hearing nothing until morning. At 3 a.m., with my heart beating so hard I thought it would wake the entire house, I put my plan into action. I dressed silently, took the already prepared backpack, and began the journey through the dark hallway to the living room window that led to the yard. Each step was an exercise in self-control, each breath measured not to make noise. I passed by my cousin's room, by the half-open door of Aunt Susan and Uncle Robert's room. I reached the living room without incident, a small miracle considering how my legs were trembling. The window opened with a minimal creak that sounded like thunder in my hypersensitive ears. I froze, expecting to hear footsteps, someone waking up, my plan being discovered before it even began. But the house remained silent, only the tick-tock of the clock on the wall marking the seconds of my escape. I put one leg through the window, then the other, and jumped into the yard. The night was cold, typical of July in Ohio, and my breath formed small clouds in the air. I quickly crossed the yard, climbed the low wall that separated the property from the street, and then I was free. The deserted streets of Columbus seemed from another world at that hour of the morning. I walked quickly toward the bus station, avoiding the few lights on, the rare people who crossed my path. Night workers returning home, drunks stumbling after a night at the bar, a stray dog or two sniffing trash cans. When I arrived at the bus station, There was still an hour before the bus was to depart. I sat in a dark corner, the backpack pressed against my chest, alternating between the fear of being discovered and taken back, and the terror of what I was about to do. Return to the town where I had lost everything, where perhaps the man who destroyed my life was still lurking, but there was a new determination in me. A fire that didn't exist before. I was tired of being the victim, of living in fear. I wanted that nightmare to end. I wanted justice for my mother. I wanted to be able to move forward without constantly looking over my shoulder. The bus arrived punctually at 5 a.m. I bought the ticket with trembling hands, half of me expecting the ticket seller to ask what such a young girl was doing traveling alone at that hour. But he just took the money, handed over the ticket, and went back to reading his newspaper, completely oblivious to the drama unfolding before him. I sat in the back of the almost empty bus, looking out the window as the lights of Columbus were left behind. On the horizon, the sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink that seemed out of place amid the darkness of my mission. The trip to Millfield would last about an hour. 1 hour to think, to doubt, to almost give up and turn back. 1 hour to strengthen my resolution, to remember my mother's body on the living room floor, to feel again the weight of that monster on top of me. When the bus finally entered the town that had been my home for 14 years, I felt a lump in my throat that almost choked me. Nothing had changed. The same streets, the same houses, the same faces on the sidewalks. It was as if time had stopped, as if the terrible events of that May night hadn't shaken the foundations of that place as they had shaken mine. I got off at the bus station with wobbly legs, not just from the long journey, but from the weight of what I was about to do. My first destination was the police station, to deliver the letter to Officer Richards personally, to explain my plan face to face. The streets were busy, decorated for the 4th of July celebration that would begin that night. Colorful banners crossed from one side to the other. Stands were being set up in the central square. The smell of popcorn and cotton candy was already beginning to perfume the air. I walked quickly, head down, fearing to be recognized before the time. But as I approached the police station, I noticed something strange. There was an unusual movement. Police cars with lights on, people gathering in front of the building. I stopped at a safe distance, observing the scene with growing apprehension. What was happening? Had Jack been captured? Had he attacked someone else? That's when I heard, coming from a group of women standing on the sidewalk, the words that would change everything. They got him. They caught Margaret's killer. My heart jumped. It couldn't be true. Right today, just when I had come to put my plan into practice? I approached the group, trying to hear more, trying to confirm if it was really about Jack they were talking. It was in a boarding house near the bus station, one of the women was saying, her voice laden with indignation. The bastard had been hiding there for days. It was the boarding house owner who recognized him from the picture in the newspaper and called the police. They say he didn't resist arrest, added another. He was so drunk he could barely stand up. It was true then. They had caught Jack. My plan would no longer be necessary. Justice had found its way even without my intervention. My legs weakened and I needed to lean against a wall, not to fall. A confused mixture of emotions flooded me, relief, disbelief, a strange disappointment at not having been part of the capture, and stronger than anything, a profound exhaustion, as if all the adrenaline that had kept me functioning for the last 24 hours had suddenly drained from my body. It was over. The nightmare had come to an end. Jack would face justice for his crimes, and I could begin to try to rebuild the pieces of my shattered life. I rested my head against the cold wall, closed my eyes, and for the first time since that terrible night, I allowed myself to cry freely, without fear, without shame. I cried for my mother whom I would never see again, for the girl I was and would never be again, for the lost dreams and for the nightmares that I hoped would finally begin to lose their strength. My dear listeners, sometimes fate acts in mysterious ways. While I was planning a risky trap, while I was escaping in the middle of the night willing to face my worst fears, the wheel of justice was already turning, independent of my efforts. They say God writes straight with crooked lines, and maybe that's true. Maybe my desperate escape wasn't really to capture Jack, but to give me back control over my own life, to show me that I was stronger than I thought, that I could act instead of just react. On that Saturday in July 1971, while fireworks exploded in the sky in celebration of Independence Day, while the town celebrated oblivious to the private drama of a 14-year-old girl, something new was born inside me. A determination, a strength I never knew I possessed. A fierce will not just to survive, but to live, to rebuild, to transform tragedy into something meaningful. And that's exactly what I did in the years that followed. I rebuilt my life, piece by piece, brick by brick, until I became the woman I am today, at 68, sitting on this porch in Millfield, Ohio, sharing my story with you. After Jack's capture, I returned to Columbus with Officer Richards, who found me wandering near the police station. Aunt Susan almost had a heart attack when she saw me arrive, escorted by a police officer. First, she thought I had done something wrong. Then she was furious when she found out I had escaped in the middle of the night, and finally she cried, hugging me, when she learned Jack was in jail. "Never do something like that again," she repeated between sobs. I almost died of worry. The trial happened 4 months later. It was a difficult, painful process, having to face Jack again, having to relive every detail of that terrible night in front of strangers. He was different, thinner, aged, his eyes opaque, empty of any emotion. He no longer seemed frightening, just pathetic, broken. A man destroyed by his own demons. The sentence was the maximum possible at that time, 30 years without the right to parole. I never knew if he served the entire sentence. After the trial, I made a promise to myself never to seek to know about him, never to let him occupy space in my head, in my life. For me, he died in that courtroom. The man I once called father ceased to exist. The years that followed were of slow reconstruction, sometimes painful, but constant. I continued living with Aunt Susan and Uncle Robert, who became my legal guardians. I went back to school, although at first it was difficult. The nightmares, the panic attacks, the pitying looks from colleagues who knew my story. Columbus was a bigger city, but news still travels fast, especially tragic ones. Aunt Susan insisted I go to therapy, something not very common at that time, especially in a city like Columbus. The psychologist, Dr. Helen, had a simple office in a borrowed room at the health center. In the first sessions, I could barely speak. The words stuck in my throat as if they were afraid to come out, to give form to the horror I had lived through. "Take all the time you need," she would say with infinite patience. "I'm here to listen when you're ready." It was Dr. Helen who taught me that trauma is not something we completely overcome, but something we learn to carry, to integrate into our story without letting it define who we are. It was she who helped me transform anger into fuel to move forward, to build something meaningful from the ruins. At 18, against all expectations, I got a scholarship to study law at Ohio State University. It was a rare opportunity for a girl from a small town, especially one with my background. Aunt Susan cried when we received the acceptance letter, from pride, from fear of seeing me leave, perhaps a bit of both. "Your mother would be so proud," she said, holding the letter as if it were a treasure. "She always said you would go far, Edith, that you had a special light." Moving to OSU in 1975 was like entering another world. The campus was large, noisy, full of possibilities that Millfield and even Columbus could never offer. In the first months, sharing a tiny dorm room with 2 other students, I felt completely lost. The university was intimidating. The huge hallways, the classrooms full of young people who seemed so much more prepared, so much more confident than me. I felt like an imposter, as if at any moment someone would discover that I didn't belong in that place, that I carried secrets too dark to be among normal people. It was during this period of doubts that I met Jennifer, a classmate who would become my best friend for the years to follow. Tall, with curly hair that seemed to have a life of its own, and a laugh that echoed down the hallways, Jennifer was everything I wasn't. Extroverted, carefree, full of friends and stories to tell. For some reason I never fully understood, she decided to adopt me. She sat next to me in classes, dragged me to the bars that students frequented after classes, included me in study groups. Gradually, her light illuminated the dark corners of my soul, showing me that there was still room for friendship, for laughter, for light moments even after everything I had gone through. "You're too serious, Edith," she would frequently say. You need to learn to live a little. And I tried. I really tried. Gradually, I lowered the walls I had built around myself, allowing people to enter my restricted circle of trust. I learned to smile again, even when the smile didn't completely reach my eyes. I learned to talk about the weather, about books, about politics, about anything other than the past I was trying to leave behind. Studies became my refuge, my fortress. I immersed myself in law books, with a dedication that impressed even the most demanding professors. There was something deeply satisfying about understanding the laws, the mechanisms of justice, the systems that could have protected my mother if they had worked as they should. In the third year of college, when we needed to choose an area of specialization, I had no doubts. Criminal law, with a focus on crimes against women and children. I wanted to use my experience, my pain, to ensure that others didn't go through what I went through, or at least to ensure they found justice if they did. It was in a criminal law class that I met Stephen, not my cousin from Columbus, but a young man from Cincinnati, son of a traditional Ohio family, with gentle eyes and a calm voice that immediately gave me security. He sat next to me on a day when Jennifer was absent, and we began to talk about the case the professor had presented, a crime of passion that had shocked the city years before. I don't agree with the defense's approach, he said, and there was a conviction in his voice that immediately captivated me. There's no such thing as a crime of passion. There's crime. Period. Passion is no excuse to take a life. Those words reverberated inside me like a bell. It was exactly what I thought, what I firmly believed, but had never heard anyone express so clearly. At that time, it was still common the idea that crimes for love were somehow less serious, more understandable. Hearing someone, especially a man, completely reject this notion was like finding an unexpected ally. Our friendship grew naturally throughout the semester. We studied together in the library, discussed cases, shared books and articles. Stephen was brilliant, with a sharp mind and a sense of justice that seemed so aligned with mine that sometimes it was as if he read my thoughts. It took me a while to realize I was falling in love, or maybe I knew, but tried to deny it. After what I had been through, the idea of intimacy with a man terrified me. The few dates I had tried in previous years, always encouraged by Jennifer, had ended in panic attacks, in sleepless nights filled with nightmares. But Stephen was different. He never pushed, never invaded my space, never asked questions about my past that I wasn't ready to answer. He had a patience that seemed infinite, a gentleness that disarmed my most solid defenses. Our first kiss happened on a rainy night, after a long day at the library preparing a paper on criminal recidivism. We were walking toward the bus stop, sharing an umbrella too small for two, and suddenly he stopped, looked at me with those eyes that seemed to see far beyond the surface, and asked if he could kiss me. The fact that he asked, that he waited for my explicit permission, meant more to me than he could imagine. It was the first moment in years that I felt I had complete control over my body, over who could or could not touch me. I said yes, and when his lips touched mine, gently, unhurriedly, something that had been frozen inside me slowly began to thaw. Our relationship progressed at the pace I needed, slow, respectful, based more on deep conversations and moments of mutual understanding than on any physical aspect. Stephen never pressed me for more than I could give, never showed frustration when I pulled back, when the nightmares returned, when the past came between us. It was to him that I finally told my whole story, on a starry night in our last year of college. We were sitting on a bench in the Oval, the place where we used to spend sunny Sundays. The words came out difficult at first, then in torrents that I could no longer control. I talked about my childhood, without a father, about his sudden return, about the strange behaviors, about that fateful night that had forever altered the course of my life. Stephen listened in silence, holding my hand, his eyes fixed on my face, without judgment, without pity, just a deep understanding and a contained anger for what had happened to me. When I finished, exhausted, emptied, he hugged me, and in the warmth of that embrace, I felt something I hadn't felt since my mother's death: complete security, the certainty that nothing bad could reach me while I was there. "You're the strongest person I've ever met," he said simply. and there was genuine admiration in his voice that made my heart expand. "And if you allow me, I want to spend my entire life trying to be worthy of your trust, of your love." We got married in 1979, right after graduation. It was a small ceremony, just the closest friends from college, Aunt Susan and Uncle Robert, my cousins from Columbus and Stephen's family. I chose a simple dress, without many adornments. I wanted something that represented the new beginning, the simplicity, the truth I had found beside him. Our life together began in a small apartment in downtown Columbus. Stephen joined a public defender's office, while I got a position as an assistant in the district attorney's office, working directly with cases of domestic violence, a department that was just beginning to form, at a time when these crimes were still treated as family matters, not as the serious violation of rights they really are. The work was difficult, often devastating. Each woman I attended, each traumatized child I saw in the courthouse corridors, brought back flashes of my own past. But there was also a deep satisfaction in being able to make a difference, in using my pain as a tool to help others, in transforming tragedy into purpose. In 1982, our first daughter was born, Margaret, in honor of my mother. Holding her in my arms for the first time was like a miracle, a reminder that life goes on, that even from the darkest ashes, the most beautiful things can be born. 3 years later came James, our second child, completing our small family. Motherhood brought challenges I didn't expect, irrational fears that something would happen to my children, recurring nightmares where I couldn't protect them, moments of panic when I was alone with them. Therapy, which I had never completely abandoned, became once again an essential part of my routine. "It's normal," explained my new therapist in Columbus. "Trauma doesn't disappear, it just changes form. Now that you're a mother, your old fears have found a new focus." With patience, with Stephen's constant support, I learned to deal with these fears, not to let them control my relationship with my children. I learned to be a present, loving, protective mother without being suffocating, strong without being rigid. The years went by. I was promoted in the district attorney's office, eventually becoming the first woman to coordinate the Crimes Against Vulnerable Persons Department in Columbus. Stephen opened his own firm, specializing in human rights. Our children grew up, studied, followed their own paths. Margaret became a doctor. James chose music, becoming a guitar teacher at the city conservatory. Today, looking back at my 68 years, I see a life I never imagined would be possible on that night of terror in 1971. A full, meaningful life, built brick by brick on the ruins of what was destroyed. A life that honors my mother's memory, that transforms her premature and violent death into something that helped save other women, other children. The nightmares never completely disappeared. There are still nights when I wake up in a cold sweat, heart racing. The sensation of hands holding me against my will so real that I need to turn on the light to make sure I'm safe, that it was just another dream. There are still days when certain noises, certain smells, instantly transport me back to that house in Millfield, to that room, to that moment. But I learned that this is part of who I am, not all that I am. The trauma shaped me, but didn't define me. The scars are there, visible to those who know where to look. But they're not the first thing people see when they look at me. They see the retired judge, the mother, the grandmother of 3 beautiful grandchildren, the woman who helped change the way the judicial system treats crimes against women and children in Ohio. I returned to Millfield 5 years ago, after more than 4 decades away. Stephen had already departed. A sudden heart attack took him while he slept. A peaceful goodbye after 35 years of love that healed me in ways I never thought possible. The children were established in their own lives, and I felt an inexplicable call to return to my roots, to close the circle. I bought a small house, not far from where I grew up. In the first months, it was difficult. The memories were on every corner. In every older face I recognized from my childhood memories. But gradually, new memories began to overlap the old ones. New friends, new favorite places, a new routine that had nothing to do with the dark past. The house where I grew up doesn't exist anymore. It was demolished years ago to make way for a small market. In a way, it was a relief. I didn't have to pass by there every day. I didn't have to see the place where I lost everything. It was here, on this porch where I'm sitting now, talking to you, that I began to think about sharing my story. Not as a confession, not as a request for pity, but as a testimony that it's possible to rebuild life even after the most devastating losses, that it's possible to find purpose in pain, that it's possible to love again even when the heart has been broken in the worst possible way. My dear ones who have followed me this far, I thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening to my story. It's not easy to talk about such painful things, but I feel it's important. Important for me, as a form of liberation, and perhaps important for someone who's watching and going through their own valley of shadows at this moment. If you're suffering, if you're lost in the darkness as I was, know that you're not alone. Know that there's a way out, even if it seems impossible to find right now. Know that life has an incredible capacity for renewal, for healing, for new beginnings. Before I say goodbye, I'd like to ask a little favor from the heart. If this story touched you in some way, please give that thumbs up and subscribe here. This helps a lot to bring this message of hope to more people who might need to hear that it's possible to survive, it's possible to start over, it's possible to find light even in the darkest moments. And don't forget to leave a comment telling me which state you're watching from. I'd love to know who's listening to these stories from all across America. It helps this channel grow and allows me to keep sharing these difficult but important stories. A tight hug from this grandmother who, despite everything, believes in love, in the power of justice, and in the capacity we all have to rebuild ourselves, no matter how many times life tries to knock us down. May God take care of each one of you. Until next time.